Sure if this is working. Oh, there it is. Dana Schwartz from Entertainment Weekly, thank you so much for coming out tonight, and please welcome the incredible star of the film, Maggie Gyllenhaal. So first things first, how did you come to this project?
Okay, mine's on. I was just sent the script, and it was one of those feelings which I've had, maybe 2 or 3 other times in my career where I was like, I don't know why, and I don't know exactly how I'll do this, but I know I need to do this. And you guys just finished watching it. You can imagine reading the last line on the page and closing the script and going like,
Yeah. Did you relate to Lisa? Was that something that you cared about?
I think always when I have that feeling that I described, and actually anytime I think I'm drawn to act in something, I relate to it, and I think the reason that this one called to me, I guess, in the way that it did is, it gave me the opportunity to explore something that was on the edge of what I know about myself, which I think is usually the thing that makes something exciting to me. So yes, I totally relate to her. I think most of us can relate to her if we're honest, maybe especially women, a feeling of having twisted ourselves around and sacrificed things that we wish we hadn't sacrificed, and kind of waking up to the consequences of what that can do to you.
One thing I read is working with Parker, who is the actor who plays Jimmy, you actually sort of acted like their kindergarten teacher during filming. What was that experience like?
Mm-hmm. I mean, sort of. Like, they knew I wasn't their kindergarten teacher.
You didn't just show up, Miss Gyllenhaal today.
Yeah, but I guess I knew that 5-year-olds, I had a 5-year-old at the time, and now I have a 6-year-old, and I guess I knew that 5-year-olds aren't really actors. I don't think that we could have gotten the performances and the sort of vibe that we wanted out of any of the kids if we constructed it in just like a normal way. And so, yeah, we set it up like a kindergarten class. I mean, like I said, they knew, and they started to go like, I know you're in Batman.
They're too young.
They are totally too young. It was their parents, I'm sure, but yeah, we would paint paintings, and we would actually do those letters, and we would sing those songs. I mean, you can't make kids act like they're singing that song we're singing, you know what I mean? And do it over and over again. We shot it like a documentary, that part of it, sort of, yeah.
Well, one thing that's sort of challenging about working with children is there are sort of restrictions in place for how many hours they can work in the situation. Did that ever present a challenge in filming?
Yeah, actually. First of all, we were making this movie for nothing. For not enough money, really. And so we shot the whole thing in 22 days. And all of the stuff with the kindergarten, yeah, really fast. That's what, like old school independent movies in New York, changing my clothes in the bathroom on the Staten Island ferry, for real. So what did you ask me? You asked me how that, yes. So there were times when Parker would have to go, and the little boy who plays Jimmy, and so I would act without him for my side. We'd shoot his side of a scene, and then my side sometimes I would shoot with the 50-year-old bearded first AD, really, down on the ground on his knees, which is interesting. Are you guys a room of actors? I feel like you are, right? So in a way, you have to do this thing anyway, always when you're acting, where you're like, okay, I may have imagined that this character would be like this, and yet here I come to work, and this character is actually you, or, and then you have to make that adjustment. And the I think sometimes the weird energy between what you imagined and what is the reality can make for something really interesting happening. And so for me, when I'm like, okay, well, whatever, I have to act with our first AD, in a way, I'm talking to this child as if he's a grown up. Yeah. And, in a way, this is a woman who's compromised constantly, always, all her life. And here's another way I'm having to compromise. And you know what I mean? So you just like take those things and I think you make them work for you, or else things suck. You know what I mean? Like you just have to do that.
Well, one other thing about Lisa that is so incredibly relevant sort of in this moment where women are kind of getting their voices is there's something so heartbreaking about seeing a woman who's been her voice has been so restricted for so long. Does now seem like the perfect moment for this movie to be released? It's like you couldn't plan it any better.
Yes, and I think the reason why it appealed to me and why I was drawn to it when I read it 2 years ago is the same reason why it's relevant now. I mean, like I said, I think many women are waking up to feeling like they can't sacrifice in the way that they've sacrificed before. Like it sort of can't go on anymore, and I think, I guess in the same vein, I was always interested in I read after Sundance a couple of articles that said that her poetry was mediocre, which I thought was interesting because her poetry is actually written by a brilliant published poet. And I think that's a wish, right? It's a wish that her poetry is mediocre. If her poetry is compelling, even if it isn't the most genius work ever written, well, then it's a much sadder movie. And then we have to consider, well, who does decide what work is important? And, and is there something about feminine work that's considered less high art? Those things are on my mind.
Well, I think one brilliant issue that this film raises is whether artistic genius is something that just emerges spontaneously in individuals or whether it's something to be cultivated. As an actor, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that idea is kind of walking an interesting line in the movie. I mean, I guess the movie in some ways is set up that he's a poetic genius. On another level, the movie is really almost like myopically in her mind, and she is a poet who isn't being heard. And all of a sudden, there's a poetic genius in her class. I don't think that's totally what it's meant to be saying. I think 5-year-olds, I have had 2 5-year-olds, all of our 5-year-olds in our lives say and do incredible things that if you put a frame around them in a particular way, can certainly be a poem. And I think her need is so big that in some ways, and maybe I was thinking this way subjectively to be able to play her, I don't know. I do wonder, who is the author of these poems? Yeah. Who, if she writes them down in a certain way, breaks verses up, changes this, changes that, whose poems are they? And at the same time, like you're saying, is this something that can be cultivated? Her interest in him, her focus on him does then create someone who feels that he's a poet, that these things that come out of him are worth something. But I actually think the movie probably exists somewhere in between those things, that he's actually a poetic genius or that she's kind of imagining it. I think it's walking somewhere in between those two.
And there's something to be said. A thing exists that's found word poetry, that someone who's able to take words that are in nature and put them together in an interesting way and frame it. That is its own art form.
Yeah, and I think it's almost trippier than that. I think it's sort of unclear whether it's coming from him or whether in some ways it's all coming from her, which is possible in a movie like this. Someone was talking to me recently about Polanski's movie Repulsion, where you're so in her mind that you don't totally know what's up or down, and I think it could be similar here.
With such a deep and complex character, what was your process coming into the role? How did you prepare? Especially with such a short shooting where you're like, I have to start and I have to be in it.
Well, I remember when I first kind of like turned my attention to it, and I do this. I feel like I'm like, oh, I got to start working on that. And then I don't. And then,
Can't relate.
yeah. And then finally I do. And then once you do and you just turn to it, everything is grist for the mill, right? Like, one thing I started doing, first of all, was I started following some poets on Twitter. I mean, it was just, what started happening is I would wake up in the morning and I would look at Twitter and I would have poems in my mind, like in this kind of like half awake, half asleep time. That was one of the first things that happened. And I think a lot of it, I did other things and I don't always do this kind of such like solid research, but I hung out a lot in this kindergarten class. This woman who I heard on the Upper West Side of New York was this amazing kindergarten teacher and about my age. And so I went and I took a lot from her, actually. But I do think that most of what was exciting to me about playing her was like getting into the part of myself, like I said, that feels starving. And I think in particular as a woman, and that feels like how the places that I've twisted myself up in order, in a confused way, to survive or, get in touch with that.
We're going to go to audience questions in a bit, but I do have to ask you, you announced a new project that's Elena Ferrante adaptation. Can you talk a little bit about moving into the directing space with the Lost Child? The Lost Daughter. Lost Daughter.
Yeah. I think it's sad to admit this in a way, but I think a part of me, even though I've always been a lover of movies and a storyteller, I think somewhere I didn't feel entitled to direct. And I think I thought, almost in the same way that like 100 years ago, you might have been like, oh, I'm a medical-minded woman, I'm going to be a nurse. I think I thought I'll put my storytelling in with my acting. And I do, and I love that. I do love that. It's such a part of the pleasure for me. But I guess something changed in me, and I think it has something to do with the current climate in this country, where I just went like, I think I can do this, I think I'd like to try. And I was also very inspired by playing a director on television, by playing Candy. And I think also partially Candy is a director in that show because of choices I made in terms of playing her. So it's so interesting and meta. And so, yes, Elena Ferrante.
What a perfect fit as someone who has brought sort of female voices to be like, these are literary texts. These can be stories about women and female friendships, and they matter in the literary community.
Also, I'm really interested in what it means to make feminine film. And I don't know exactly what that means, and I don't want to be reductive about it, and I'm still really thinking it through, but like, I don't think it just means it's directed or written by a woman. I think we live in a masculine world. I mean, and we're realizing now, as much as we want to do wishful thinking, like, we can't. We live in a misogynist world in a lot of ways, and so it's hard, since there's not a lot of model for it, to make feminine work, right? And I guess I felt when I read Ferrante, like I was like, oh my God, something is being expressed here when I read this that I've never heard expressed before. And I had this feeling where I'd be like, oh my God, this woman is so fucked up. And then I go like, and I totally relate to her. And I'm comforted by someone else writing something down that I relate to that I've never heard expressed before. And that is what I want to do when I'm acting. And that is what I'd like to do as a director. And so, I mean, to me, to be able to be even slightly in conversation with her, you know, she's anonymous. And so I can't actually speak to her, but I've been emailing with her.
Would you tell us if you were actually in contact with her, like for real?
I would not, but I mean, I actually just like didn't read any of the articles where they were, you know, trying to break down who she was. I mean, this is someone who said, I don't want to be in the public eye, you know?
Especially because it turns out it's not like it was James Patterson. It was like an old Italian woman being like, I want to be anonymous for these reasons. And people still tried to violate that.
I don't know who she is. And I didn't read about it. But I wouldn't tell you even if I knew.
Well, I think on that note, we go to questions from the audience that were submitted on cards earlier. Caitlin.
Do I get to know who you are?
You can stay anonymous if you want. No pressure. Caitlin wrote, you always play such ambitious, provocative, and curious characters. Is that a quality you seek out in your material or something you personally bring to each character?
He's all the way back here in the back row.
I can't see you. Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think, first of all, you don't want to go to work on something for a long time that's going to be boring. And so, you know, I want it to be hard and I want it to be, challenging me. And all my characters are me. I remember telling my mom that about Candy. She was like, it's so disturbing to watch season 1 of The Deuce. And I was like,
oh, no, your parents watched The Deuce?
My mother did. My dad didn't watch season 1. But I told him in season 2, I totally have my clothes on and he's going to watch it. But my mother watched season 1. And she was like, I find it so hard to watch, so disturbing. And I said, it's just me. You know? And the thing is, it is just me, except in very, very different circumstances and with this other fiction around it. And the cool thing about fiction, and especially, well, this is interesting to talk about in relation to the kindergarten teacher. I think the cool thing about fiction is it gives you freedom. So if, like I said, I'm attracted to this script or this part, I don't know exactly why, but like I have this feeling that there's something in there that's like in the territory of what I'm exploring about myself. And it's hard to explore stuff about yourself, and it always hurts, and it's always like a deep challenge, but I get to wear a wild wig and 6-inch heels, and it's almost like a little protection. Whereas I would say with the kindergarten teacher, where yes, she has very different circumstances than me, but I've got my hair. I mean, I partially chose those clothes because it's like sort of what I would have worn in college, you know? And I like hate them, those clothes. And yet I really understand them. And, you know, there was less fiction there. And then, of course, right, it goes so far over an edge. She kidnaps a child. Obviously, that's not in the spectrum of possibility for me. But
say, who among us?
But I guess this is sort of an answer to your question. Like, I like it when I guess I like it when it's hard.
And I have a quick follow-up question to that. Which of your roles do you, A, get most recognized for, but B, get the most people coming up to you and like really wanting to talk to you about?
That's a good question. I can usually tell what movie if somebody liked. I've been wrong though. I mean, a lot of people saw The Dark Knight, so a lot of people talk about that. There are some that are especially close to my heart. And so when someone comes up and says, like, I love Cherry Baby, like I have a brother who went through that, or it means a lot to me. I think there's a sprinkling. There are some that nobody likes and nobody ever talks about. There's a whole lot of those. But I'd say there's like a top 5 probably.
Great. Well, this question is from Vanessa. She said, how is it to work with your young co-star?
He's amazing. He's this bright, and by bright, I mean both sort of bright and also very smart, little wild thing. And there's something really amazing about that. It sort of puts you totally right there having to respond to this little creature. And I loved that, but it's a lot of work. And I had a 5-year-old at home. And when the 2 days that Gael Garcia Bernal was there, I was like, oh my God, thank you. You're like a grown up, and you know your own lines, and you're like, you got your own thing.
What is
going
the
on.
movie that your 5, now 6-year-old like watches over and over again? Because I think all kids do that.
Right now she's into Hotel Transylvania 3.
Classic.
My other daughter is my other daughter likes like super esoteric, like this Pina Bausch documentary. And like, if I ever suggested like, let's buy your Halloween costume on Amazon, she'd be like astounded. And like, no, we have to like sew it by hand. But my little one, she's definitely got more mainstream movie taste. I have almost no memory of kindergarten. I remember I had a teacher in preschool who, and this is not my reason for doing this movie, but who just like she wasn't creepy or anything, but she just like especially liked me and gave me presents and stuff. And I was remembering that and thinking about the character in this movie. I think children don't like it when boundaries are crossed, and I think they identify it immediately. They want rules to be clear, and I think that that's sort of interesting about the little boy here. Somebody asked me at a Q&A earlier today, like how he would ever know to call the police at the end, and that it felt like he was sort of going with me up until then. And I thought, I really don't think he's going with me up until then. I was thinking about that scene in the bathroom early on where we're acting like cats. And he's like, can I go back to nap time now? He knows that even though the boundary's only slightly crossed, he totally knows it. Yeah, I don't remember my kindergarten teacher though. I remember my first grade teacher, Ruth. Mostly because my mom really liked her.
So 2 questions, one from George and one from Nikki, sort of asked the same idea that I'll paraphrase. And it's, so what did you learn about the teaching profession from this film? If anything, that you didn't know. Maybe something more challenging.
Well, I mean, I think I have the utmost respect for a kindergarten teacher. I cannot imagine having that job and doing that. Well, no, I did imagine, I guess, but having that job for real and being responsible for 20 kids, I think is really commendable. It makes me think about that scene at the end of the movie. My husband, who is an actor, who I think his opinion of my work is the most important of anyone's to me. He saw the movie a couple of days ago, and he was talking about that scene where after Jimmy's dad calls and Lisa's so upset, and like I go into the preschool and I have this plate of snacks, and all the kids come and grab it, and he was like, it was like you were a sow and there are all these piglets, like everybody's sucking on you. And And I do think, I mean, that's very thematic to what we're talking about in terms of being a woman in America and, giving. And, but also just imagine the reality of being a kindergarten teacher for real.
It's a mess. Jeff asks, as your career has progressed, has what you look for in a character changed?
Yeah, I mean, what I look for, yes. And I think my own sense of my instincts about what appeals to me, I've gotten more confident in. But what I look for in a character changes all the time. It isn't really intellectual. You know, I'll like read it and just be like, I don't know, can I like get in there, or I don't know. Yes, it changes all the time. I don't know what I'm looking for now. And the other weird thing is like sometimes I'll get attached to something 2 years ago, you know, or The Deuce, where, you know, I signed up to do that like 3 years ago, and we just keep going, you know, and I had never had that experience before. And I have to, I'm so different than I was 3 years ago. And so then this person's going to have to be so different. And how do I keep it really current and relevant with like what's on my mind now? Because it won't be good if it isn't.
And then just the last question, what are you watching when you're not constantly doing all of this?
Yeah, I don't watch a lot. I am really busy and I get tired, you know, like, and my oldest daughter's 12 now. So by the time I get her to bed, it's like late, you know, but I really was into Fleabag. It was so good. And they're each 20 minutes.
Perfect for parents.
Yeah, but isn't she amazing? I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but I was like, the writing, the humor, it's so funny and so well done. I dug that.
Let's watch Messy Women.
Yeah. Did you see Fleabag?
I love Fleabag. Yeah. She's amazing.
She's amazing.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
And one other thing. You know what else I loved? I loved Phantom Thread.
Yeah.
I mean, in a room full of actors, I mean, it's like, I just was like...
The score. I like listen to it.
The score is amazing.
Blast in the club, put it on the aux.
The score is amazing. And the whole thing, everything. Yeah.
Well, that's great. There's so much good stuff out there. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
This is great.